What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball podcast. I am your host, Trill Bro Dude, and today I am excited to have back onto the podcast to talk about the Sixers offseason from Dime Uproxx. You probably know him from Liberty Ballers. We got Jackson Frank. What's going on, Jackson?
Doing well. Thanks for having me back. It's been quite the eventful 4.5 months in Sixers world since we last together on here.
Oh yeah, I mean we've had the rise of a dynasty and the fall of a dynasty in season, and now we're back on the slop because it has been a crazy week and a half, 2 weeks, kind of everything developing with James Harden and PJ Tucker and Danuel House. Everything that has happened, the De'Anthony Melton trade at draft night, kind of everything has led up to this point where we're still getting rumors about what the Sixers could possibly do. My gut says I don't think they're 100% done, but I think all of the big moves have definitely been made. So how do you feel about just like, are the Sixers done? And also on top of that, like, what's going on with the James Harden extension right now?
Yeah, I think they're probably like among maybe guys you project in the top 7 of the rotation. I feel like they're probably set there. That's just, a gut. And I mean, you also look like, I know that the Harden thing is going to open up some flexibility maybe with some of their signings and whatnot. But those guys usually cost a lot that, are in the top 7 of a good team's rotation. I don't think they really have any, even if Harden takes a big discount, I don't see, and I don't even have candidates that make sense there. Especially considering their biggest, weakness is at the 3, and the league tends to very much enjoy paying those players handsomely.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, with the Harden thing, it seems, it seems like as free agency got closer and then actually commenced, like the AAV for him continues to like go down. It seems like just like whether what's being reported or what people are speculating, and it seems it's like very much the Harden and the organization are in lockstep about that, right? Like it's not like they're having to like, it doesn't. I mean, this is just speculation for me, but it doesn't seem like they're having to like pitch him so hard on this. It seems as though he's like, yeah, like whatever we can do to upgrade this roster. If it means, I make $31 million over 3 years versus 38, like I'll do it, which I think is, I wish I had the ability to haggle.
Just turn down 17 million, it's fine.
Exactly. But that's what it seems like. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they get someone who's maybe a 9th, 10th, 11th man somewhere here, but
sure.
It seems like they're definitely cooking up something, right? Because like if he was just going to get 3 years 105 or 270 or something like that, 2+1, then it seems like they'd probably be done by now. I'm not really the salary cap guy in Sixers Twitter or in NBA Twitter in general, but it seems like that wouldn't necessarily open up anything big for them. I know Adam Aronson's talked a lot about, or pitched a little bit, that might be a 1+1. I think he's just speculating there as well, and I think that could be something that maybe takes a little more time to, hammer out the details versus just a straight extension. So, just that that's a big, it's a big caveat, right, for both Harden and the organization. We're going to do 1+1. You'd imagine they're going to be pretty nuanced. I mean, they're nuanced with everything, right? But you imagine it might take even longer with something like that, offers some flexibility and risk for both sides. So
yeah, definitely. And Shams actually did mention, I remember when free agency kicked off, we were doing the stream, and they had mentioned, like, Sham comes on, and he's basically like, the Sixers and James Harden are going to work on an extension to give the team flexibility, everything you kind of just talked about, right? Like, access to the MLE, access to the BAE. So we're like, oh my God, he's going to take way less. And then what he said was to enter the market again next offseason. And I'm like, okay. So I'm assuming with Morey and Harden's relationship, he trusts that if Morey extends him for that 1+1 that Adam brought up, that kind of idea, that he's basically going to do kind of what like happened with Chris Paul when he was signed and traded to the Houston Rockets, which is like Chris Paul gets signed and traded to the Houston Rockets. He goes there. The Rockets are great. Paul gets hurt in the playoffs, but it doesn't matter anyway. He immediately extends him for that crazy amount of money that Chris Paul got. Not that Chris Paul doesn't deserve it, but it was just like a lot of money for a guy that at his age coming off that injury. And I do think that probably is what's happening. We're recording this on Sunday afternoon. I'm going to release it on Monday morning. Hopefully there isn't more stuff that comes out that just kind of ruins this part of it, because that's what tends to happen during slop season. You record an hour-long podcast, and then 20 minutes of it is just like out the window. But I would imagine that there would be, like you said, kind of a more minor move, whether it's getting a 9th or 10th man, or whether it's turning Thibault and Korkmaz into one guy, or whether it is maybe just even doing a salary dump for a guy like Korkmaz, because like, I don't think he's going to be in the rotation next year. Like Thibault, you could talk me into him being in the rotation and being like a viable guy off the bench, hopefully. But I feel like with Korkmaz, like the guys that they brought in, just kind of focusing more on like that two-way player element of everything, and like guys who have viability on both ends of both sides of the court. Like it does seem like if they could move off Korkmaz, now he has this year and next year, so it might be a little bit tricky, then they probably would just salary dump him to save money on the tax, because right now, you know, they paid PJ Tucker $11 million. They're paying Danuel House like $4 million. So that's like $15 million of new guys being brought in. So long story short here, I don't think there's going to be any sort of massive moves like the next thing we'll talk about. But I do think that like I could see, for example, Kyrie Irving. I don't see a Kyrie Irving trade happening. Like I look at it like between the history between Harden and Kyrie, which literally just happened a few months ago. I feel like everyone forgets about this. Like it just happened. Between that, the fact that Kyrie wants to go to the Lakers, and then on top of that, the fact that like you're looking at a situation where Tyrese Maxey is your third best player right now, and then you're relegating him to the bench. And once again, Kyrie Irving's an amazing talent. But I would be really shocked if that report that came out from Shams last night regarding this wasn't just leverage from the Nets side to try to get more out of the Lakers in a potential trade. So once again, I could see one of those smaller moves. I could see a salary dump, but I would be really, really surprised if they made a massive swing, like trading for Kyrie Irving. But then again, I guess you never know with Daryl Morey, right?
Yeah. And I also want I don't know what the Sixers can necessarily like are going to offer that's that enticing compared to even like the Nets or the Lakers, right? That like, you know, obviously Tobias is a better player than Russ. I'm not saying otherwise right now, but like,
of course,
there's more appeal to the expiring deal, right? Whereas Tobias has 2 years left. You're not trading Maxey for an expiring deal and Kyrie. Like you're just like Taylor Horton Tucker has not been particularly good yet, and I'm not a young guy that I'm very optimistic about, but I could see the Nets being interested in that over a Springer or an Isaiah Joe or things like that. So it just doesn't seem plausible to me. I will say though, I like the concept of you just say screw the wings and you just go Harden, Maxey, Kyrie, and Melton around and you're Embiid, not Isaiah Joe. So I do like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a tweet from last summer, I think it was, where I said the Embiid and 14 guards, and that tweet might actually be happening. It's the market inefficiency. Everyone is obsessed with wings, so we're gonna have like a top 2 center, and then also literally all the best guards that we could stack on top of each other.
Oh, and our one wing, he can't dribble, and he also isn't vaccinated this week. He can't play in Toronto.
Well, he's gonna be in Brooklyn. Don't worry about him.
I agree. I don't see the feasibility of a Kyrie deal. And I think Dave Early, my colleague at Liberty Ballers, took out an excerpt of like maybe the Sixers reported interest, and it described Kyrie and Harden as acquaintances. And I was like, I don't know if that's the most like reassuring phrase. Like, I don't call people that I'm particularly like I feel neutral about people that I tend to be my acquaintances. So I was like, I don't know if this article is doing what you think it's doing. Not that Dave didn't write it, but whoever did, it was like kind of an odd term there. You'd usually call them friends if you're trying to pitch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And especially because Kyrie called him his brother after everything. Like even when they had the falling out, he's like, "There's no bad blood. He's still my brother." And then it's like they're acquaintances. Like they're fine. Like they don't hate each other. And it's like also, I don't know if Kyrie's the one that gets to determine what their relationship is like, right? Like he plays a role in it, but it's funny. It's like
it seems like based on reports, like your inability to play was a big reason that like Harden didn't want to be there anymore. I don't know if you're the one that should be like determining where you guys stand after that entire thing.
Yeah, exactly. From my point of view, it's totally fine.
Yeah, it's like you get broken up with and you're like, yeah, we're still on great terms. Like, I don't know if that's how it works, Kyrie.
But it's actually funny. I'm going on, me and Dave are going on a podcast after this. I'm going on to Dave's podcast and we're going to kind of hash that out a little bit longer. But and this is the kind of point that I will make on the whole when it comes to the Kyrie idea. I actually think the best pitch that I've heard for trading for Kyrie was the fact that you would just get off the Tobias Harris contract a year early, which is basically like if you trade for Kyrie, you're not including Maxey in the deal. Like that's just like off the table. Like obviously you're never going to do that. You didn't include him for James Harden. You're not going to include him for Kyrie Irving. So the argument was basically the first year of the Kyrie experience is always like the honeymoon phase, right? Like in Boston and with the Nets, like everything was great. And then, some things happened. He got injured both years, those years, but it didn't seem like the falling out with both of those teams really came until the second year, right?
Well, I guess third year in the
Sure. Yeah, I forgot he sat. Yeah, because Kevin Durant sat out the first year, so I don't even really put that one on Kyrie as much. Like he was injured, he didn't go to the bubble. Yeah. Like it's whatever. But my thing was like, I think that, and like everyone says, like winning solves everything, right? Like that's like the big thing. It's like, well, if Kyrie came here and like you got past that second round hump, and you got to the Eastern Conference Finals, or you got to the finals, or you won the finals, like, well, obviously if you won the finals, it would be worth it. But like, let's say you get to the finals, or you get to the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, I do think that would help for convincing Joel Embiid to like stay with the Sixers. Like that would be like the biggest argument for it, right? But my whole thing with Kyrie is like winning doesn't determine everything with him, because like he was on the Cavaliers with LeBron James and was like, peace, I'm out. The Celtics made it to the conference finals and then had a pretty good team the next year. Everything fell apart. The Nets were championship favorites basically back-to-back seasons and everything fell apart. Like there isn't when we talk about like the off the court, like human emotional stuff that isn't like completely just on the court talent stuff, there's just so many red flags and question marks with Kyrie that like I just wouldn't want to be the team that's just like, yeah, we'll take a chance, even though like obviously on the court he's a massive upgrade over Tobias Harris.
Yeah, and I think like especially with Kyrie, the whole winning idea, like he's won, right? Like it's not the same. Harden's not. I'm not comparing Harden to Kyrie's personality, but it's not the same as like where Harden like he really wants to win, like he wants to get to that mountaintop. Kyrie got there with like arguably the greatest player ever, and like so it's not he's not waiting to taste or savor the glory of a title. Like he's had that. And he's such a unique personality, so I tend to agree there. I think the part that maybe would work in favor of kind of pitching this idea would be like it's a 1 year thing, right? And like because he's a free agent next year, and so if it doesn't work, then the two sides walk, and if it does, then so I think I'm generally, I would say I support the idea of the Sixers, trading for Kyrie, but I just don't see it as a feasible option as I laid out earlier. So, I generally tend to be pro because it's a short-term partnership at worst or best, whatever you want to phrase it as. But yeah, it just doesn't seem likely. It seems to be a leverage thing from Brooklyn's side because basically all the neutral reports or reports that maybe come from more Kyrie's side of things, it's like LA. And LeBron wants to play with him, and LeBron, and whatnot. So LeBron obviously has a lot of sway in the league. So
for sure,
whereas the Nets side, it seems like we've got all these different suitors, and it's like,
like you got like maybe Dallas, probably not. And look, I think Daryl Morey does his due diligence on everyone. I think that he will call. I think him, Masai, like generally speaking, the best GMs are going to make a phone call. And just be like, hey, we want to know what it's like at least. What's going like what are you looking for? Is there anything realistic that we could make happen? Whatever. But at the same time, everything we've said about it like not being really realistic. I also think like most of the time when we talk about like getting a guy in a contract year, I'm like, hell yeah. Like you get a guy in a contract year, he's gonna bust his ass. Like there's plenty of examples of guys overperforming in contract years and like really trying in the regular season and the playoffs. But like Kyrie, once again, is kind of the exception to a lot of rules, like where like he could just as easily get here and just be like, yeah, I don't want to play anymore.
Yeah, we just saw him in a year where he was eligible for a giant extension.
Yeah,
he played 29 games, and
yeah, he's like, whatever.
Like, yeah, I think the thing that I would say too, like, is I'm not saying that like Daryl operates by like what's the word, like considering the opinions of his two best players all the time. Like, I think maybe sometimes, but I think if in this specific instance, if he was going to, if there was a possibility of acquiring Kyrie, I think he would talk with Harden, especially, and even Embiid to an extent. Like, is this the sort of thing that, like, do you like Harden? I know you just play with, like, is that something like, is this feasible? Are we going to have like locker room issues and like that? So I think in this case, like, not to try to like appeal to authority, that or anything like that, but like I think if in the unlikely event that Kyrie does become a Sixer, I don't think the Harden saga would like loom large, because I think Harden would be someone who's supportive of it.
He would have to be, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's not to say that it would play out ideally. Maybe they, it's always like, the idea that like, distance makes the heart grow fonder. Maybe they forget that it's like, oh yeah, maybe I don't like playing. I don't like seeing this guy every day. But I'm just saying that on the surface, I don't think that like Daryl will be like making this move, and then Harden's like seeing the notification from Shams, and he's like, oh no, I think there'd be at least asking or inciting.
Of course. They're hanging out in the Hamptons right now. I just saw Michael Rubin post a picture with Lil Baby there. So I'm assuming they're all there to work out his Supermax with Fanatics. And
the timing of that couldn't have been more perfect. As free agency begins,
so funny.
Michael Rubin is getting rid of his minority ownership stake in the Sixers.
Just merely a coincidence. Yeah. Merely, just the timing is just completely random, not planned at all.
Subtle guys, nice job.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, like I totally agree with kind of what you said. Now, if for example, Joel Embiid, Jason Dumas reported, I had heard this as well, that Joel Embiid, was pushing the front office to at least make a push for Kevin Durant, which it's Kevin Durant. Of course, you're gonna I think any player in the NBA would want to play with Kevin Durant. He's one of the greatest players of all time. I don't think the Sixers have enough, even if they include Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris and Matisse Thybulle. Like, there will be offers out there that have draft capital and prospects that are going to be able to beat them. But like, if Harden and Embiid were on the same page in that regard, went to Morey and they were like, look, we can bring in Kyrie as the third guy, and like, we'll still have Maxey as the sixth man. Like, that's a loaded, talented team. And like, ultimately keeping those guys is what's happy, but like, or what happy is what's best. But like, looking, like, it's funny because like most of these reunions that happen, whether it's like Harden and Durant or like or Kyrie and LeBron that's coming up, there's usually like a 5 or 10 year gap in between where like, they kind of forget about all the things they didn't like about the person. Like you said, like, you could just kind of go about this reunion or whatever and like, make a big deal of it. And then they get back together and everything's great and they're playing well, blah, blah, blah. This was literally this calendar year. It was in February that this breakup happened.
Yeah, 5 months ago, they were still on the same team. So.
Yeah. So that's why I think it is just absolutely like out of the question. But, it's Kyrie, so you never know. And it's Morey, so you never know. Those are the two guys that, like, I feel like from an executive standpoint and from a player standpoint are the two most unpredictable guys in the NBA. What's going on, guys? I am very excited to announce that Philly Sports Trips is now the official travel partner of the Ball podcast. The biggest reason why I've partnered with Philly Sports Trips is really simple. I give them my money. I have a mini vacation that involves the Sixers, Eagles, and Phillies, and I don't have to lift a finger to plan anything. I can party as light as I want or as hard as I want, and Philly Sports Trips takes care of everything that I hate. The planning, the organizing, researching where to go, and I get a 5-star hotel, non-crazy flight schedules, and tailgates that have unbelievable food and booze, and most importantly, it's a douchebag-free zone. These are just some of the many reasons that I am excited to partner with Philly Sports Trips. I can't wait to go on a Sixers trip next season, and Uniball is absolutely going on the road to at least one Eagles game. So let me know which Eagles game you would want to go to, and I would love to do a huge Uniball road trip. Out of all the cities, I'm thinking New York or Chicago, but I want to know what you guys think as well. So tweet at me at TrillBroDude, DM me, comment on the YouTube, and let me know which Eagles game you guys think we should go as a group this season. Phillies and Eagles trips are booking right now. So head over to phillysportstrips.com and let them know that You Know Ball sent you for two very important reasons. Not only does it help fund the podcast, but we'll have VIP events and goodies specifically just for You Know Ball listeners. phillysportstrips.com, premium travel for every Philly sports fan, and a proud sponsor of the You Know Ball podcast. On to Eric Gordon. So Eric Gordon, once again, another report came out that basically said like, hey, the Sixers are going out after Eric Gordon. And then immediately, Cap people got together and they were basically like, yeah, that's not really possible unless you move Tobias Harris, which all of this basically comes down to what Harden extends for, what we talked about earlier, and if they can move Tobias Harris. Because Tobias Harris, his contract is so big that it makes even making moves now that you have the MLE, the BAE, whatever, because of the hard cap, since you use those exceptions and potentially if you get back someone in a sign and trade, all of those things you have to work within the, constraints of the hard cap. So long story short, and they could try to do like a 4 or a 5 for 1, kind of similar to what Dallas did in the Dallas and Houston did in the Christian Wood deal, or the Celtics and the Pacers did with Malcolm Brogdon and Daniel Tice and all them. But at the same time, it does seem like that would be Thibault, Korkmaz, Niang, and Isaiah Joe or Shake, one of the two on the minimums. And so you're basically getting rid of the back end of your roster, and then you're bringing in Eric Gordon, and you'd have like 12 or 13 players, I believe it is, on the roster, and you'd have no room to operate if Harden signs for that $35 million number. Like, you would literally go into the season with like 13 players on the roster, which does not seem realistic at all. But at the same time, like, I personally would be like, if we could turn Thibault, Korkmaz, and whoever into, and Niang and whoever into Eric Gordon, like on paper, that would be great. I mean, I feel like I would have a lot of trust in our 1 through 9 if they're able to pull off that consolidation trade. And I would like that way more than just trading Tobias in a salary dump and getting back Eric Gordon and then whoever else fills up the rest of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, obviously, Tobias, the contract is what it is, but like, he's just a better player than Eric Gordon. Like, I mean, and I like Eric Gordon. I've talked about the merits of trading for him, a guy that can pass he doesn't pass really, but a guy who can drive and shoot is like a really, like, and I think you've talked about, like, he's really, his numbers on drives are really good. Shot well from 3 last year. Makes sense, but I think it's short-sighted to move Tobias to get him. I just don't think it makes sense. Tobias is good in his role. Now, if you could move Tobias and then you trade for another wing or something that opens up more space, then sure. But like that's like, it doesn't make sense to me to move Tobias in that deal. It's a worse player that you're getting back. But yeah, I think it makes total sense. And your guard rotation becomes really, really good at that point, right? With Melton, Eric Gordon, Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, like all different kind of, I mean, I think there's definitely some similarities between Maxey and Gordon, at least offensively, but like all different types of guards too, right?
Sure.
So, and that's pretty good. You would be short on wings, but like, I don't think like one of the tropes that kind of bothers me about the NBA is people like, I'm not saying like you don't need wings, but like, we just watched the finals where like there were basically like 3 wings and the 2 teams rotations. I know that Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Drew Wiggins are all parts, but like none of those, like there was nobody else in the rotation that would be classified as a wing really. So
right,
like that's not the only way to win. And so like, yeah, you would want a wing or two to be available in your rotation, but like it's not imperative that you have them over the Sixers. And I think it, from a basketball perspective, it would be cool to watch a team to try a different way to build, right? Like with a dominant big man and then some complementary guards and whatnot. But yeah, I'm with you that I wouldn't move Tobias just to make room for Eric Gordon, unless you're getting back a guy who can kind of fill Tobias's role of that big wing defender.
Right. So could you get like Harrison Barnes is the question. Like that's like the most popular one that's brought up all the time. I don't think that Sacramento would have any interest because of drafting Keegan Murray. I don't think they would have interest in bringing in Tobias. That is like the kind of framework where like, okay, I could get down with that if it were a possibility, I don't think it is a possibility, but like if you could get a Harrison Barnes, if you could get even like a Reggie Bullock from the Mavericks or whatever, and then Eric Gordon fills out the rest of the salary, okay, you could talk me into these kind of moves. But generally speaking, like you said, Tobias is a better player than Eric Gordon. And like, you know, Eric Gordon, while he probably was like that kind of perfect fit for those Houston teams, and I do think that he would still be a good complementary player here, ideally you would want him coming off the bench and having a smaller role at his age, at like 33 years old, I believe he is now. I think once again, this could be an angling, like if there were a Tobias move where he's getting traded to a third team, because it does seem like the Eric Gordon stuff is at least somewhat real, and like they really are genuinely pursuing him.
We heard it from both sides, right? We heard it from Keith, of course, on draft night, and then I forget his name, sorry, but
Jonathan something from the
the other covers the Rockets for The Athletic. Really,
Kelly Aiko?
Yeah, no, his
the other guy. Oh my god,
I can't remember. He has really great work, a lot of film stuff. I apologize for not having his name here, but he reported, he like confirmed Keith's report, and he's like, I'm not usually a sources guy, so I think it's definitely telling that people from both parties are talking about it. So, and usually I usually when people say they're not sources guys, they're not worth believing, but this guy is. He's covered the Rockets for a long time, and so he was more saying that like if I'm confirming something that like it's got legs. So yeah, I tend to agree that there's definitely at least been considerable talks, but it just. Yeah, I guess unless it's a 4-for-1, 5-for-1, but I don't know like what's the big appeal, like what's the kicker for Houston, right? Like what are you giving, I guess like maybe the idea that like George Niang has value, maybe you can move him to, get something back, a young guy that you like, or
if you like Isaiah Joe, but like at the same time, like they have so many young guys that they're trying to develop right now. And like my whole thing on this has basically been like, if there were some kind of move, like I said before, like if you could get back that Harrison Barnes or whatever, but like then you're starting to get into like this crazy level where like we're moving Thibault along with Tobias, and then that team is sending an asset to the Rockets, like a future first or whatever, but then like they're taking on the Tobias contract, so why would they send a future first? So like it gets really crazy. The only idea, it kind of relates to what we talked about with the Kyrie thing, where like Gordon isn't guaranteed for that final year of his contract. So him and Tobias have the same amount, but Morey's the one who made that deal. And he's technically going into the final year of his deal. So if Morey wanted more flexibility or whatever for next offseason, plus he thinks Gordon might be a good fit for this team and he wants PJ Tucker to have a bigger role and whatever, then that could make a little bit of sense. But at the same time, like, I think Tobias is going to have value a year from now for the Sixers as an expiring contract, if anything. Like it's kind of like the Russell Westbrook,
especially if he like plays like he did for the last couple months of the year. Like I mean, guy defended well, shot well from three, moved the ball well as a driver as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's definitely. I think there's the potential for Tobias to have like the most impactful year of his career this next season, and then be a guy that like clearly he's well regarded as a personality around the league, and like expiring, he's a veteran. Like there's clearly a ton of appeal for him if he continues to play like he did the last couple months. So yeah, I tend to agree. And I think, my boss, Paul Hedrick at Liberty Ball, has talked a lot about it. It just seems a lot more likely that he's dealt next year than this year. It just seems like the stars align better for that. So I tend to agree with you for sure.
And I also think like, the regular season is really long, and like having multiple guys who can shot create, multiple guys who can run at least a little bit of offense whenever you're resting Harden or Embiid or whoever it is, like the goal is to keep these guys healthy for the playoffs. And like, Tobias, obviously, if his whole thing is like he wants to be on ball more, the nights where those guys are sitting are the nights where he gets to kind of do that more. He can flex a little bit more and run some pick and roll and have some offense run through him. And still in spurts in the regular season, you're going to want to give Embiid rest during games. It's something that Andrew Underberger brought up when he was on the podcast, was like, this was kind of before Maxey had his like real breakout, like during the season, but he was basically like, Tobias is a guy who can eat possessions in the long regular season and let Embiid rest during a game. Even like he can take a few possessions in a row. And now it's like you have four, and I'm all for the idea of having like 5 guys on the court at all times that can create at least a little bit. And like, PJ Tucker and Melton might be able to attack secondary actions, even though Melton, it's not his strongest suit. And wasn't really PJ Tucker's until this last year in Miami. But having Tobias as a guy that you can fall back on as a creator in a pinch, whether someone gets injured or someone needs to rest or whatever it is, just to have someone that is an extra shot creator can't really hurt. And like, once again, if we could figure out a way, and if Michael Rubin, if you're listening to this, just throw the bag at James Harden so we can circumvent the cap and we can get Eric Gordon here. Because apparently another thing that I have heard is that his two best friends in Houston were Gordon and Tucker. So that might be part of the reason why he's been pushing for us to get these guys, because he knows he plays well with them. They know his game. He knows their game. And then on top of that, like, they're good fits, and like, you want to keep your stars happy. So, and also I think Embiid loving PJ Tucker doesn't hurt too, because he's, calling him a dog and like mental toughness.
Him name dropping PJ Tucker 45 minutes after the PJ Tucker was a key piece of the team that sent them home.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't hurt things either.
Yeah. So I do think that the Eric Gordon thing is also unlikely. I think that might be the kind of move where I honestly just, like, if Houston turned down multiple picks in the 20s this year for Eric Gordon, I think they'll probably just let him expire. Like, unless he's involved in one of these massive deals that's probably going to happen sometime in the next week, which could be like a 5 or 6 team trade, depending on what happens with Ayton and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and all of that shit. Then I do think that it's most likely that the Rockets will just hold on to Gordon, unless the Sixers can figure out a way to get back something. But like, I don't want Davis Bertans. I don't want guys that like are just like salary filler in a trade. And I know Sixers fans get fed up with Tobias and whatever, but like, ultimately he's going to be better than almost anyone that we can get back from him right now, at least. And then a year from now, I think you revisit the situation, you see how everything went, you see how he fit and whatever, and you can maybe move him as an expiring and have a way to improve the team next offseason. So,
yeah. I will say about the Eric Gordon thing, I want you mentioning them like turning down multiple picks in the 20s. And I think one of the things that maybe I've seen, maybe this is just Rockets propaganda, but it seems like people tend to praise Raphael Stone for kind of like doing right by some of the veterans. And
sure.
So I wonder if maybe it's one of those things where like they're kind of talking with Gordon about these things, and like does he want? And maybe this is me being too optimistic about how GMs operate with players and whatnot. But like, maybe there's some of it like would you rather just stay in Houston and kind of mentor some of the young guys, or do you want to go to team Y? So that's just some speculation. Again, maybe it's too optimistic about that sort of thing, but it just seems like I've seen people praise Raphael Stone for treating some of these veterans properly as they exit Houston. So I kind of just wonder about that. But yeah, I think we kind of exhausted the Gordon talk on here. For sure.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, I feel like it's funny because like Lakers fans, people that have like Miami Heat fans, Lakers fans, like they sit around and they obsess. Like, how can we get Donovan Mitchell? When does Jason Tatum's contract expire again? And Sixers fans sit around and they're like, if we could just have 33-year-old Eric Gordon, all of our problems would be solved.
And 37-year-old PJ Tucker in the world. it's like the Utopia meme if the Sixers had Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker. The world would be perfect.
That's right. Yeah, we literally. Well, the jokes so far. We'll talk a little bit about the trades and the signings that have happened so far for the Sixers right now. But like, the jokes have been like, oh, they're reassembling these old Rockets teams, and some of the points that have been brought up by people is like, those teams were really good.
Yeah, no, I think I tweeted to like the jokes are great, like making like, but like
yeah,
I saw some, maybe this is me strawman or maybe just looking at the wrong stuff. Like I thought maybe like actually kind of like criticizing Morey for them. There's a reason to criticize Morey with some of those mistakes or whatnot, but like they built a team that won like 65 games that way. Like I know Danuel House wasn't on the 17-18 Rockets, but like he built some really good teams around Harden. Like
sure.
Like, and now he's acquiring guys, and I know they're older and stuff, but yeah, I think it makes sense for sure. So like, there's legitimate things to criticize Darryl for during his time as a Sixers, president of basketball operations. But like some of the stuff I saw about that, it was like he's just signing good players, like who fit well along his stars. So yeah.
This free agency class was just really bad. Like I do think that's being kind of, because like there have been really not a lot of trades, and there was expected to be trades, but because of the Kevin Durant thing, it does feel like a lot of moves might have been put on the back burner. And like there's only been like a handful of trades so far, and the large majority are coming from free agent signings. And then you look around the league and you're like, There's not a lot of cap space. There's not a lot of like good free agents. Like there's just like a handful of like solid rotation players you might be able to acquire for like the BAE or the MLE. And all things considered, when it comes to that, I think it's totally fine. I think it's totally fine. I think that I do think that like everyone got a little like they got a little bit hooked on the slot because like we had draft night 2020 was so exciting. We had the Harden trade, which happened a few months ago, which was very exciting. We had these big splash moves. And like sometimes you just get like last offseason where like obviously the Ben Simmons situation created its own unique world. But like you get George Niang and Andre Drummond, who were good contributors for especially for how much money they made. And that's it. And it's just kind of boring. And you're just like, really? That's it? Like that's all you're doing? But like this time around, like I think the idea of the players that they went after, Melton, Tucker, House, and then I don't really know much about Travion Queen, but him as well. Like it does seem like they're focusing more on this two-way element. So you have to be able to like, one of the things that we saw in the playoffs, and I think the Boston Celtics are like a great example of a team that just kind of was like really good 1 through 8, 1 through 7. And like all of those guys could generally speaking survive on both ends of the court. Like I think of course, not everyone was a great two-way player, but they all had elements that they brought to the table on both sides. And I think that Daryl Morey and the Sixers front office said, we need to get more guys who can stay on the court in the playoffs on defense and offense, because you have your George Niang who can't stay on the court defensively, and then you have your Matisse Thybulle who can't stay on the court offensively. So the guys that they brought in all kind of fit that mold, and I'm totally fine with getting more two-way players and building out the depth, because the depth was absolutely terrible after the James Harden trade.
Yeah, and I think what he wants too is like maybe like skew defensively somewhat, but like your offense has to be able to like play well off of Embiid and Harden. And I think Melton can do that, especially with his high volume 3-point rate and his effectiveness. And Danuel House is a guy. The thing that's interesting to me about Danuel House is like people kind of call him this 3-and-D wing, but like I think his best skill is offense. I think he shot well from 3 with Utah, but like I think his best skill, like he attacks closeouts well. He can pass on the move a little bit, and like most of the Sixers complimentary guys couldn't attack closeouts. Right, like I wouldn't consider Maxey a complimentary guy. Like obviously no, he's great at that, but like Danny Green, like everyone knows, you didn't want him dribbling. George Niang, you didn't want that either. Like Furkan, no. Shake, like you just want something a little more from Shake. Perpetually the last couple of years, unfortunately. Isaiah Joe obviously is a rotation guy, but we know his struggle scoring inside the arc. So like a guy in Danuel House, I think, is an interesting dynamic of someone who can attack closeouts, dribble a little bit in like advantage situations. So I like that wrinkle for sure. But yeah, I tend to agree that like they're trying to find guys who maybe skew defensively in terms of what they're better at, but also can play well off of this team's best players. And so yeah, I agree. It hasn't been a splashy offseason thus far yet, but like they upgrade. Melton's a better player than Danny Green. They're different players, but then you add Tucker and Danuel House
over Niang, like House
Danuel
over Thybulle, or whoever it is in the rotation.
Yeah. So I the thing with Tucker, I do wonder, and I wrote about it, but like I do worry a little bit about them kind of paying for a career outlier year from him last year. Like like he was fine for Milwaukee. The offense was pretty poor, but like he's not getting and I get he played better, so like he made more money, but like he's not getting anywhere close to that last offseason, right? What do you get? You got 215 or whatever with a player option on the site.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Or 213, I can't remember. But like he's not getting a 333. So I worry a little bit about that with Tucker. Like if the 3-pointer regresses back to where it was before last year, the floater was something he was really reliant on this year. I think he was like over 50% on runners.
Yeah, he was really good in that.
And that's a tough shot to kind of suffice on. But yeah, the defense, the Miami Heat's defense, they're kind of the surrounding defender. I think we're better equipped for Tucker, or the movement shooting kind of helps get to those short roll situations. So I worry a little bit, but I do think that like Tucker is going to help, and having like a wing who can guard multiple positions and like slide his feet quite well is useful. And I think what's cool too is like you can kind of like use like part of the issue, like Tobias not first round, right, against until Toronto realized that they could set screens for Pascal. Like he played really good defense. Tobias did.
Sure.
The screen navigation is obviously not something he's great at, But now I think it's interesting that like you have some lineups maybe where you can play like a, I don't know how feasible this is, maybe offensive, but like a foursome of Melton, Embiid, Harris, and Tucker, and like you can feel pretty comfortable switching those things. Right? That's what made Tucker so good. Is like he wasn't fighting around screens all the time, but like he's aggressively attacking that switch and then passing off to someone else who can, switch too. So there's 4 guys there that you feel comfortable with. So and even Danuel House as well, right? So and that's an important thing is like the Sixers had some issues defensively last year because when the playoffs, especially when you got Tobias off of the primary guy, it was like, all right, what do you do now? Whereas it's like, all right, now you got some options. So I have some concerns about the Tucker offense, like I said, and I kind of went on a tangent there, but I like the Tucker fit maybe a little more after I've seen the kind of the conjoining moves. Right? I talked about in my piece that like I worried about the defensive fit, but as we talked about, the defense is better now than maybe when I analyzed his fit initially in Philadelphia.
Sure.
So that's important for sure.
Yeah, and I also think like having played with Harden before, something that we discussed, knowing how to play off Harden on offense and defense, because, with James Harden, you're going to switch more. That's just kind of how it is. And like, Tobias, got to give him credit for when he was switching last year. I joke around and I say he's the worst versatile defender in the NBA where like he can guard. He's not a particularly great defender. When he locks in on that end on ball, he can be pretty good, but like, not many guys are guarding Karl-Anthony Towns one game and then Darius Garland the next game. Like it's kind for someone that isn't known as a defender, he did a pretty good job, all things considered. Did a good job on Siakam in the playoffs, like you had mentioned. But I do think that like I wonder about like how much the offense stuff is going to matter, because I think about like what Tucker is going to bring to the table on offense, and I think about like we all know him as the corner 3-point shooter. We know that he can do a little bit attacking closeouts now, at least more than he did before, where like he's putting the ball on the ground, he's getting into that floater game. He might be able to move the ball a little bit better with the short roll passing as you described. But I do wonder, like, going from Matisse Thybulle, who like can be completely left open in a corner and can kind of mess up the spacing, is everything just going to revolve around that Harden and Embiid pick and roll? And it's just kind of like this gravitational force, right? Where you could just put PJ in a corner, you can space him out to the top of the key, and then your whole idea is that you basically just have guys who are completely willing 3-point shooters and then at least somewhat able to attack a closeout in order to kind of make your half-court offense a lot more versatile. And Tucker's offense definitely scared me when he played for Milwaukee, which is why I didn't want him last offseason, because I was like, he's 36. I don't want to be the guy that pays the 36-year-old to come here and then completely regress. But last year, like, it does seem like this. Would you argue like was that the best year of his career, at least two-way wise? I
think it was, and I never want to like be the numbers guy, but I think EPM said so. Sure. Obviously, I wasn't in depth watching PJ Tucker when he had the start of his career necessarily, but among the last 3 or 4 years, definitely, I think, and he was good for those Houston teams, but yeah, he shot like 42% from 3 between the playoffs and the regular season. As I mentioned, the floater is really good. So yeah, definitely the best. I think the best year of his career. And I wonder with Tucker, the thing that's gonna be important is his usage offensively, because like he just does not shoot above the break threes. Like I think I looked at the glass, like between the playoffs and regular season, he shot like 22 of them, which is like
they're almost all from the corner.
Yeah, and Boston realized that, like they just like he doesn't look at the hoop above the break, and they realized that in the third round and kind of ignored him. So that's gonna be important, is keeping him in the corners. And then also I can't remember, is it Harden's right side where he doesn't usually like he can't really pass like from left to right, or is it right to left?
I honestly don't know.
I know there's one weakness that like of his passing, like he can't pass that well to a certain corner. So it'd be important, just whichever one it is, I should know this. But regardless, point being is whichever one that is, like making sure Tucker's not the guy there, because then he's just a total liability. Because teams don't really guard in the corners anyways, and they're not gonna prioritize a corner 3 from him over an Embiid roll or Harden drive.
Absolutely.
So just kind of important notes there. It's like not to station him where Harden can get in the ball, and also to station him where he's going to shoot the 3 when it comes to him, or at least do something with it, rather than basically stand with his back to the rim above the break.
Right. And I mean, the rebounding is definitely going to help. He's a good rebounder. Melton's one of the best guard rebounders in the NBA that they just acquired. Like, I do think that they looked at what the weakness is. Like Daryl Morey said before the deadline, it was funny. He's like, we needed to work on defense and rebounding. And then he just traded for James Harden. And he was like, okay, well, we got James Harden. Like, what can you do? So I do think that they're both going to help in that regard. We know what Melton can do on the defensive end. I guess my whole question revolving around all of this, because like I didn't watch a ton of Danuel House. It does seem like he's a guy where when he is tasked with a lot of offensive creation load, he's really bad. Like everyone in Houston, like Rockets fans have been tweeting at me like, this guy's going to drive you nuts. Like he'll make you want to pull your hair out. And I'm like, well, like at any given time he's on the court, I'm hoping he's like the fifth offensive option. Like I wouldn't imagine you're running any sort of offense through Danuel House. He's there to attack. And, I don't even think he's going to be running secondary actions. I think he'll literally just be attacking closeouts, shooting open threes, doing whatever he needs to do as a role player in that regard. So I don't really know what to make of Danuel House, because like this is a guy who a few months ago was available for a veterans minimum, got picked up by two different teams, found his footing, as you said, with the Jazz, like to the point where like a Jazz fan said to me that at one point they benched Royce O'Neal for Danuel House at the close games in the playoffs, which to me is like Royce O'Neal makes $9 million a year and just got traded for a first round pick. And Danuel House, we just got for $4 million. And like, what does he bring to the table really? Because is he going to be, like obviously he's had a history with Harden. And if you look at his numbers when Harden and Chris Paul were there, like, and then right after it was like two completely different players. Like, it's like crazy how much his numbers fell off. So what is he going to bring to the table for them on defense? And like, do you think he'll be closer to what we saw in Houston and in Utah than what he was whenever, Harden was gone?
Yeah, I think, he rightfully so is playing over Royce O'Neal in the playoffs. I mean, Royce O'Neal struggled defensively like a lot more than he did last year, and that he's so passive as a shooter. And yeah, I mean, Danuel House, from my recollection, from my watching, I should say, in Utah, like pretty good guarding it, kind of twos and threes, moves well, kind of understands angles. Kind of similar to Danny Green. I think he's much better lateral than Danny is, but kind of similar idea where it just feels like when Danny has a good defensive possession, it's like he knew where the guy was going. And that's how Danuel House is, I think, at least in Utah. So I think that's important. I think you usually want to keep them on twos and threes. Don't really want to have many ones and fours. But yeah, I think Rockets fans are right to some regard that or to some degree that you might get frustrated with him a little bit attacking closeouts, maybe doing a little bit too much when the ball swings his way. Obviously, Sixers fans are not unfamiliar with maybe a limited wing doing too much of the ball in his hands and Danny Green, or limited off the dribble, I should say. So I think we definitely have some frustration there, but I think he's much more fluid attacking close than Danny Green. Different, not the same caliber of shooter, but can pass better as well. So there was some frustration. He's not perfect. I don't love his off-ball defense. I'd have to go back and look at my notes a little bit more, but I generally just remember him being best on the ball. Defensively. So good pickup for sure. I think, as if he plays like he did when he was on in other good winning situations. So I like it for sure. And I think he's a guy that you can play, as your seventh, eighth man. As you said, like the fact that they have more playable guys now, I think is important. Like that was, they ideally they had kind of the high end talent last year, but didn't quite work that way between, Embiid's injuries and Harden inconsistencies. But it just definitely didn't have the low end, the depth there, right? So right. I think it's a good move when you're not going to be relying on him for even starters minutes for the most part. Well, you might. We're going to talk about the opening of the three, but
right.
But I think ideally, as we said, we don't think this is the last move they've made, but we did kind of say that we didn't think it's the last significant move they've made. But anyhow, yeah, I think Danuel has a good pickup. I didn't love the BAE for him, but it did seem like maybe that was what the market determined just because of the scarcity of wings available.
Sure. Like Cody Martin, who I would have loved, got $8 million. Like we just,
and I think that's, a totally reasonable deal for Cody, assuming he's as good as he was last year offensively, but definitely more than that. Because I read about both Martin twins and I thought they'd be more like taxpayer MLE guys. Obviously the Sixers end up having the non-taxpayer they use on PJ, but I didn't expect 4 for 32 for Cody, and I think it's a worthwhile deal. But between that and the House move, it seems like there was a
and then you wrote about Gary Payton II as well, and he got I believe 7.5 or 8 million too, if I remember correctly.
He got 328 from the Blazers.
Yeah, so Yeah, it was either PJ Tucker or one of those guys, and like ultimately, I'm fine with PJ Tucker as long as it's this season and next season, and then that last year it might be a Danny Green situation where you're looking at that contract and saying Daryl likes to have just tradable contracts. Like it just seems like he likes to have like part of the reason why they might even be trying to acquire Eric Gordon is because that last year is not fully guaranteed. And like, you'll still have someone you can move if you need to improve the roster, because it seems like a lot of smart GMs just always like to have those guys on the books. But like the idea behind getting Tucker and House in here is once again the same stuff that we've been talking about. Two-way guys can play off Harden and Embiid well and all of that stuff. But I know you love Melton. We'll talk a little bit about Melton. So like this idea of getting like a guard who, because you talked about like the wings and you said like there's only 3 wings that you would categorize that really were like heavily in the rotation in the finals. This idea of getting like guards who can almost like pass as wings at times, like for example, like Melton's 6'3", but he has a 6'9" wingspan. He did guard threes sometimes when he was with the Grizzlies. Like, what did you make of the Melton pickup? First off, did you think it was a steal? Like I did, getting him for the 23rd pick in the draft. And then on top of that, like, what is he going to bring to the table that will fit well with the other pieces that they got?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good. I thought it was a move that made sense for both sides. Kind of, I mean, I don't know. Like the Memphis has like so many cooks in the kitchen they don't necessarily know. Traded for a young, unproven guy made sense, but it did seem like Melton just maybe wasn't quite fitting there. I don't know. Maybe that's off base, but obviously they agreed because they moved him. But yeah, I mean, I thought 2 years ago he was like kind of a borderline all defensive guy. Maybe didn't play quite enough minutes. I thought he was a little less good last year, but gets around screens really well. Great hands. Plays physically. I think one of the things that made Memphis' defense so good last year was they had a lot of guys who could like play bigger or smaller than they needed. You know, Kyle Anderson could play smaller and Melton could play bigger, things like that. So great hands. It's like ridiculously cleaning the glass, like steal and block rates are like always among like the top. I think like for most of you, like the 90th percentile are better in both of them.
It's like him and Thibault are all at the top of the like the steals, the blocks, the deflections.
And I think he's a little more discretionary than Thibault, which is good. Like I think more of his like takeaways come within the flow of a defensive possession rather than Thibault kind of marching to the beat of his own drum, which is good and bad. The offense, I think he's gotten a lot better offensively the last couple of years. I think someone used to cover the Grizzlies. Man, I'm blanking on names. Someone who covered the Grizzlies wrote a nice piece about Melton 2 years ago when he first kind of, I think he shot over 40% from 3 or maybe close to it. And like he kind of revamped his mechanics, a little more fluid. So not like a guy you're running out like off pin downs, but can relocate, can kind of has a really quick trigger, garners closeouts. He's a guy who I think similar to House, his decision-making offensively might frustrate you times, really can't score well inside the arc, poor finisher, not a great handle, not super explosive. Shows passing and flashes, like he can make some pretty nice reads, but he also is taking a lot of like contested, not a lot, but like he'll take a contested runner or a fadeaway or a pull up, and you're like I don't know if that was the best move. So there's some worries there, but like yeah, really really versatile shooter. Great defensive playmaker and guard, kind of one to. I think I kind of maybe set the upper echelon of him like against like a 6'6", 6'7" guy in my article. So I like that piece a lot. I think he like there's a chance. I think he's one of their 5 best players next year. I don't know how high I would rate him in the league. I don't tend not to really entertain the rankings stuff, but really good pickup. I thought just a guy that like they needed. I like the feasibility or the possibility of like 3 guard lineups with Harden, Maxey, and Melton, which are they're all different players too. I don't know if that's something they'll. Well, I mean, I think Doc, for all of his faults, did show some lineup creativity last year, so we could see that for sure. But I like the move a lot. Just a guy who you can play on both ends. The jumper, I think about 39% through the last couple of years. So on big volume. So I like it a lot. And
7 threes per 36, like putting up like a good volume. And also once again, he already knows how to play off of a star in Ja Morant. And I do think that the one thing that like we've talked about, like when it comes to like lineup versatility and all of that with Melton with the 3 guard lineups, like you said, like I do think that this might be a little bit more of like Morey kind of forcing Doc's hand a little bit in terms of like just constructing the roster. So like giving him guys that can play multiple positions, like maybe having a small ball option in PJ Tucker that you can go to in certain situations, not signing a veteran backup big that's just going to be like someone that he knows that Doc is going to play all of the time, and kind of taking that, you know, creativity that Doc might have shown at times and things that he might be able to like take risk with and kind of like push him towards that direction. Because I do think that like ultimately that's what matters most in the playoffs. And like we know the Sixers are going to be a good regular season team. In fact, I would argue with the roster upgrades that they've made, as long as health withstanding, I think they're going to be a top 3 seed in the East. Like I think that looking at the team right now, I think the depth is significantly better. As long as Harden is somewhat normal, Maxey takes another step, and you kind of just like look at how good they were when the starters were on the court offensively, especially last year. And you pretty much do upgrades all across the boards to make your lineups more versatile, to make, to give more two-way players, all of that. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if we're sitting here and the Sixers are the 1 seed next year, just in the regular season. Like, and I think that all of that stuff matters in the playoffs because you need to be able to kind of adjust on the fly, which is something that Doc has struggled with. But if he has a larger sample size of something working from the regular season, which is one thing that Sixers fans have been really frustrated, it's like, well, why are we trying Paul Reed at backup center now? And why didn't we try him in December or January or whenever? Why didn't he get a long stretch? So like, I am thinking that like the way that this roster was constructed is like, we're going to figure this stuff out during the regular season, and we're not going to have like these easy fallback options that, you know, Doc has had in his first 2 years. And, that he tends to, because he has his guys, he's comfortable with his guys, and like, he doesn't really budge off of that. And he can be stubborn in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, I think, but like by and large, I think the offseason has been successful for the Sixers, both in who they like, how they upgrade the roster, and also like poaching PJ from Miami. Brooklyn, obviously, in shambles.
Yeah.
Boston obviously got a lot. I mean, Boston getting Brogdon and Gallo is going to be,
sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be great. Yeah. Their 1 through 9 is ridiculous.
Yeah. But then like, I mean, Milwaukee will be really good again. We know that. But like, and I think right now you could make the case like the Sixers are the 3rd best team in the East, right? I mean, that's like, I think that's a totally reasonable stance. Now, 3rd best gets you to the exact same spot you've been most of your time.
Right. Exactly.
But the obviously, it's going to come down to Harden, right? I mean, just how good they can be. Like, is he going to get back to the guy that he was, pre-injury with Brooklyn, and that we saw in spurts with Philly, and even post-injury in Brooklyn, or is he going to be, the guy we saw last year? He was like an all-star, but one whose aesthetics can frustrate you quite often when he struggles, and clearly a guy who didn't, was awful in the second half of that game 6 when the Sixers needed him most. So that's your season's always going to be tied to that to an extent, but I think generally it's been a pretty successful offseason, and the hope is that you get kind of an upswing from your role players, and Boston's maybe a little downturn from them, and maybe Milwaukee the same way. But I think you should feel pretty good if you're a Sixers fan that even though they didn't make any big moves, that like some of the stuff around them, and one of the biggest move they did make was taking the team that made the conference finals, their starting 4 away. So I tend to agree that I think they're going to be a good regular season team, and they've given themselves better avenues to, play well in the playoff. I think, the biggest thing that's important is like having like counters and flexibility and whatnot, in the way you play and the lineups you throw out there. And I think by getting a Melton, a PJ, and Danuel House, you have that. And that's always the most important thing in the playoffs, right? Like there's no one way to win. It's just about like having multiple ways to win and being able to deviate from one approach. So I think the Sixers have accomplished getting closer to that ideal. I don't know if they're quite there compared to maybe a Boston or a Milwaukee, but definitely better equipped than last year, I think, assuming that you get Embiid right back where he was a year ago. Embiid, arguably the best player in the world, so or at least in the conversation. So I think they're in a good spot, and we'll see what happens, but it's like I said, it's always going to be about Harden, right? If he's a top 10 guy, then you're probably rivaling
contenders,
Boston or Milwaukee. If he's a top 25, you're going to need a lot
Tyrese Maxey to be a top 25 too.
You need Maxey to garner some All-Star consideration next year, which I think could happen, but you feel better about maybe you want the known, right? You know what Harden's been before. You don't know what Maxey's been. You want to rely maybe on that happening again. Then maybe you don't. I don't know. I mean, Maxey's proven to be so adaptable and kind of just they say, okay, you're not good at this right now. Fix it, and he goes, all right. Does it with a smile, and there you go. So
that's what we love about him.
I'm excited for Maxey next year with his passing. I'm really curious to kind of see. I think I'm sure he's been watching so much film and like realizing he's like, oh, I missed that lay down pass or I missed that kick out when I attacked a closeout. I think it's gonna be really fun to watch next year because you saw. I mean, he was definitely a better passer by the end of the year. He just didn't have that role because, and I wrote about it, but Harden just kind of took away his playmaking responsibility. So, yeah, I tend to agree with you that they should be a very good regular season team.
It sounds like he's working on his passing and his handle right now, which are the two things that I think that everyone wants to hear. It's like, he works really hard. I guarantee you he'll be better next year. I don't know how much of that leap is going to how big that leap is going to be, I should say. Like, I think that there's a lot riding on Maxey. Like, I think that his growth and his like development could kind of sink or swim the team, just because like, once again, when you get to the playoffs, like he's proven he can perform in the playoffs. Consistency is the next thing for him for sure. Working on the weaknesses of his game, which he seems to do a lot because he's just like a really hard worker and a great dude and just like all around awesome. But last thing here before we wrap up. So the thing I've been thinking about a lot, and a lot of Sixers fans have been thinking about, is like, let's just hypothetically say they don't make another move. They don't trade for Eric Gordon. They don't get back like one of the guys that we all want, like Harrison Barnes or Reggie Bullock or whoever might possibly be acquirable. Who is going to start at the 3 for this team next year? Because I'm like, we've seen Tobias at the 3 go pretty poorly before. We've seen it, especially when he's going up against starting threes. PJ Tucker, I would imagine that he would mostly play the 4 and the 5 at when he's here. And then, we want to see the 3 guard lineup, but we don't want to start with Melton at the 3. So is House the starter at 3, you think? And then Tucker comes off the bench, or what do you think is going to happen? Because it's definitely going to be something they have to figure out.
I think it's more likely that we see Tucker. I mean, you gave the guy $11 million, right? I think that's probably that's starter's money. I think. I don't know if it's
close.
I always just go by I look at the basketball reference thing, and it's like if you're top 150 or within that range. But I think it's probably right at the tail end. I think he would start. I think the thing that with Tobias is it felt like, at least the year in, when they had Al, was like Al was so slow in that year, and just like not who he's been, since leaving Philly, or before arriving to Philly. But like PJ, I think is better equipped to like maybe let Tobias still like inhabit, a 4 adjacent role on both ends, I think. So I would probably start PJ, and so I think maybe the concerns about Tobias at the 3 could be alleviated by PJ being able to be with a little bit more of the mobile guy defensively and do his because offensively I didn't feel like the issues with Tobias at the 3 were there. I thought it was just defense and him having to be on the perimeter more and whatnot. So I think PJ can handle that a little bit, and that's where I go. I think what you want to do too is like among, I would say, PJ, House, and Melton, you kind of want to platoon them a little bit. Like, I don't think you want any of them to be playing 34 minutes a night, right? PJ and House, maybe because of their age and their history. Melton, I don't think he's quite good enough to do that. So I think that would be the goal, right? Do like kind of what they did last year, was where they platooned that 5th starter spot. Ideally, you have a guy that you can play for 34 minutes a night and 40 in the playoffs, but I just don't think they have that. But they have 3 quality bench players, and Melton, who I think could start on some teams, but maybe just doesn't make sense in the context of the Sixers as a 3, right? Like if they didn't have Maxey per se, you would probably start Melton the 2 and feel pretty fine about it. So that's what I would do, is kind of platoon it and try and mix and match based on who's playing well and who the opponent is. So you got to get 48 minutes out of the 3 of them, or out of the 3 position, right? So you probably want to play them a combined, 68 minutes a night, maybe just tossing out there. And so, having them fill the combined for 48 of those minutes at the 3 makes the most sense. But I think PJ will play that role, and he'll be able to guard a lot of the 3s and whatnot. That'll make Tobias' life easier defensively.
Yeah, and Doc can start a 37-year-old, so it's a win-win, really. I talked about Morey building a team to be more versatile, maybe forcing Doc's hand, but Doc's like look, you got me a 37-year-old. I'm happy. That's all I need. I just need one guy that's in his mid to late 30s that I can play. And hey, we got a good one. At least we got one who was a legit rotation player that we know can play in the playoffs, which has been the thing that we should be most focused on right now. So last final thing. Do you have any thoughts on, have you looked into, what is it? Trevlin
Queen. I watched him a little bit when he was in Mexico State when I was still doing serious draft work. I think back, looked through my notes. I don't know much about him. I know he won G League MVP. The Sixers are clearly cornering the market on G League MVPs. Right. Yeah, they've got 3 MVPs. None of them are Joel Embiid. Sorry about that one. But like I said, they have 2 right now. Harden's a free agent. So.
Technically, yeah. Oh, don't say that. They got
2 G League MVPs. But yeah, I don't know much about him. I think it's like, from my understanding, it seemed like it was a non-guaranteed deal. I think it's basically effectively like a camp opportunity. I think Paul compared it to like Justin Anderson's deal a couple years ago.
Sure.
But
he's getting paid $350,000 guaranteed for this year. So that's I think Anderson just had like a camp guarantee of like a few, like 10, 20,000 or whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know much about him really. I think I liked him a little bit as like a second round guy or maybe a priority undrafted free agent target. But I can't say that I've watched any of him with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. So I'm sure like Dakota Schmidt is the G League guy. I'm sure he'd have a ton of insight on that.
Oh, I looked it up. He likes him. So obviously he won the G League MVP. Of course he likes him. But no, I'll have to talk to Dakota about that because I've actually been like, he's probably just a 15th man if he even makes the roster. The fact that we signed him and gave him like that like partial guarantee, it makes me think he's probably gonna be on the team next year. Generally speaking, you don't pay a guy $350,000 and then cut him. Like that's like at least this year, I would imagine, which leads me to believe that there could be, because now that I'm thinking about it, they lost Danny, they lost Danny, they lost DeAndre Jordan, Paul Millsap, 3 guys, right? Those are the 3 that were on the team next year that won't be on the team this year. And then they brought in House, Tucker, Melton, and Queen. So maybe there is a 2-for-1 trade that they're trying to, or like multiple guys going out because look, maybe they'll just pay him for $350 and be like, all right, well, it was worth a shot. And like, he doesn't make the team or whatever. And maybe they could try to bring him back on a 2-way or whatever it is. But like, it does sound like this guy has legit. He's fun on highlights. That's all I give a shit about. He's a little bit of a hooper, a little bit of a dog. That's all I care about. And we'll see if he makes the roster. I always get excited when we sign guys that are like 24, 25, like that might have a little bit of upside or be like at least like a rotation player or whatever. If you're the G League MVP, I would imagine you at least have that kind of upside. But I guess we'll see. We'll know a little bit more this week. Hopefully, I was checking my phone to see if we got a Shams bomb or a Woj bomb about Durant or Kyrie or anything. Still nothing. So hopefully once that domino falls, we'll learn more about what the Sixers are going to do, and then we can kind of flesh out the rest of the offseason from there. So Jackson, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Always appreciate your time. You can follow Jackson in the description. Support all of his work as always, and I'll talk to you soon, bud.
Yeah, happy to talk all the time. Appreciate it. Peace.